According to WHO, an estimated 4% of the population experiences depression. Professor Windy Dryden, a distinguished British psychologist, psychotherapist, and author.
That CBT is an umbrella term. People are disturbed not by things but by their views. It really was very much the way I approached dealing with my own problems as I was growing up. I think a therapist's openness in this regard is quite important for me. I must not stammer, and it would be terrible if I did. I've been implementing these ideas for many years. Suppressed unhealthy anger will lead to your own demise. Enjoy yourself and make sure that you help others to enjoy themselves.
Welcome to KhanKlinics, your dedicated space for exploring the vital connections that shape your well-being. Here we dive into everything from achieving peak physical fitness by mastering sustainable weight management to optimizing your diet for a vibrant life. We're passionate about uncovering the power interplay between your mental and physical health, offering you insightful strategies to nurture both. Join us as we unlock the secrets to embark on your self-confidence and your inspiration by interviewing the top-rated personalities, not from only the US, but around the world. At KhanKlinics, our commitment is to bring you evidence-based information that inspires you to confidently control your health journey and live your life to the absolute fullness. I'm your host, Amir Khan. Let's get ready to unlock the true potential of being a human with the most amazing people around us. Are you waking up each day feeling overwhelmed and fatigued? Not by extra chaos, but by your thoughts? You question your worth, assume the worst, and feel stuck in cycles of anxiety, guilt, and self-sabotage. For millions of people, this isn't just a bad week, it's an everyday life. Behavioral variables such as disruptive sleep-wake pattern, low or unevenly distributed level of activity, or unhelpful fatigue-related beliefs are associated with persistent fatigue across several long-term medical conditions. Cognitive and emotional disturbances like these are now considered leading distributors to global disability, with over 280 million people affected worldwide, suffering from mental or substance use disorders. According to WHO, an estimated 4% of the population experiences depression, 5% of adults, and 5.7% of adults older than 60 years. Because depression and anxiety significantly reduces quality of life, well-being, and daily functioning, there is an urgent need for treatment. Here's good news. We're not powerless. Evidence-based therapies like CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, and REBT, Rational Emotive Behavior Therapy, have consistently been shown to be highly effective in treating emotional distress, especially anxiety, depression, anger, and lower self-esteem. So if you're ever wondered whether real change is possible and whether it can begin in just one conversation, you're at the right place. Welcome to another episode of KhanKlinics. I'm your host, Dr. Amir Khan. And today we're joined by a remarkable guest who has spent decades helping people rethink the way they should think. Professor Windy Dryden, a distinguished British psychologist, psychotherapist, and author, currently serving as an Emeritus Professor of Psychotherapeutic Studies at Goldsmiths, University of London. He's internationally known for his REBT and CBT work. He's authored and edited over 200 books on counseling, psychotherapy, and coaching. His notable work, Reason to Change, a Rational Emotional Behavior Therapy workbook, and a Rational Emotive Behavior Therapy primer, Principles and Practice. He serves as the founding editor of the British Journal of Cognitive Psychotherapy and overseen 20 book series, including the well-known CBT Distinctive Features series. Professor holds an MSc in psychotherapy from the University of Warwick and has one of his first practitioners in the UK to be formally trained in CBT. In 92, he became the UK's first professor of counseling at Goldsmith. Professor, welcome to our show.
My pleasure, Amir. And please call me Windy.
Well, that's going to be a little hard for me to call you Windy, but I'll try my best. So let's start off with a generic first question. And please make us aware of what's REBT and CBT in your words, and how would you define it?
Well, I think the best way of actually looking at what both CBT and REBT is I'm going to make the point that CBT is an umbrella term that under which various specific approaches can be located, and Rational Emotive Behavior Therapy is one such approach. So if you look at what Epictetus said many years ago, that people are disturbed not by things but by their views of things, that really shows the importance of the views that we take towards the situations in our lives. Now, REBT is a specific form of CBT, and it really rephrases Epictetus's statement thus: that people disturb themselves by the rigid and extreme attitudes that they hold towards life's adversities. And if they could change these rigid and extreme attitudes to more flexible and non-extreme attitudes, then they will help themselves enormously.
Okay, well, thank you for explaining that. So REBT is basically a redefined definition of cognitive behavioral therapy, and it's originating around your own thoughts and your own behaviors and your own patterns.
Yes, it's a specific approach within the tradition of CBT, which is a large tradition, and it emphasizes the importance of looking and helping people deal with their rigid attitudes towards themselves, other people, and life conditions, and really helping them to be adopting a more flexible mindset, if you like, towards these towards self, others, and life conditions.
Brilliant. I appreciate that. Just before we move on to RBT, how would you define cognitive behavior therapy just for a layman's person? So someone comes to you and say, oh, I know you're the guru of CBT and RBT. What's CBT?
CBT is an approach where the therapist and client collaborate around the idea that it's important to look at both the way people think about things and how they act towards things, and how these things affect, their emotions. So it's a fairly structured approach to looking at our thinking and how this interacts with the way that we behave, and to help people to stand back and to really develop more healthy ways of thinking towards life's adversity.
Thank you for explaining that. Okay, so let's then move on to the topic of the rational emotional behavior therapy, drawn more into this therapeutic model than others. Would you explain your perspective about this? How have you evolved into going into this therapy more than others, or versus other therapies?
Well, I think that unlike maybe approaches to medicine, I think it does matter what the psychotherapist believes, and also I think it matters whether a psychotherapist practice what they preach. And so we know, however, that it doesn't really matter what people practice. It's the therapeutic relationship between the client and the therapist that's really important, and also client variables. So really helping people to draw upon their own strengths. But when we do look at specific approaches, I think my view is it does matter what the therapist believes. And if you believe one thing and try to practice another, then I think you'll be found out by clients, and they'll regard you as not being genuine. So one of the things that resonated with me about REBT is that it really was very much the way I approached dealing with my own problems as I was growing up. So I used to have a very bad stammer, and I'd be anxious about speaking because I was holding the attitude, I must not stammer. Wouldn't it be terrible if I stammer? If I stammer, I would be revealing myself to be an idiot. And when I changed those attitudes to more flexible attitudes, such as, look, I don't want to stammer, but that doesn't mean that it must not be. I'm a human being with an issue. I'm not an idiot. That really helped me tremendously. And I was much younger, so I hadn't heard of different approaches to psychotherapy. But when I was exposed to different approaches, I resonated with REBT because it was very much along the lines of how I helped myself with my own particular problems as I was growing up.
Well, thank you for explaining that, Windy. Windy, tell us then, you emphasize that the beliefs of the psychotherapists are relevant, are important, and they got a belief in what they're preaching, and that's the only way you're going to be able to be getting on top. You find and look for the passion. What would be then for someone who's seeking advice from or a therapy from a psychotherapist to look into, hey, does he or she have these features and don't have those features? Would there be just like a little bit of an overview on how one should approach a psychotherapist in terms of seeking help?
One of the things, I think you raise an interesting question, and I think that when you approach a therapist and you ask them questions which I think are relevant like that, you can tell a lot about whether you're going to be working well with that person in terms of how they answer you. If they regard you as something of a nuisance, or they say, I don't answer such personal questions, I don't think that's a great sign. But I don't think the therapist necessarily has to go into a great deal of detail. But if they are prepared to be open with you and answer your questions, relevant questions like that, then I think that's a good sign that you're going to be able to get on with the person. So I think a therapist's openness in this regard is quite important, Amir.
Right. So let's move on to your book. Your book, Reason to Change. Let me start with that. And it emphasizes the importance of disputing irrational beliefs. Irrational beliefs. Would you share what are irrational beliefs? How do we dispute them? And a practical tip and a technique.
Yeah, well, one of the things that is important to me is that I keep on evolving my ideas. So although REBT does talk about irrational beliefs, I personally don't like that term. I prefer the term rigid and extreme attitudes. And I don't like the concept of disputing anymore, because it conjures up the idea that you're going to have an argument with somebody. So I prefer to think about me helping somebody to stand back and examine their attitudes to see how true they are, how helpful they are, and how logical they are, and whether they would teach these rigid and attitudes to their children, or would they teach the alternative, flexible and non-extreme set of attitudes to their children. And I think that the purpose of what we used to call disputing irrational beliefs is to really help the client to have a direction about which attitude that they want to go forward with and act upon. And so that's the purpose of disputing. It gives you what Albert Ellis, the founder of REBT, used to call intellectual insight. I can see and understand that these flexible and non-extreme attitudes are true, are logical, and are helpful to me, although they haven't yet affected the way I really feel. Now, what then happens in REBT is we encourage people to go forward and think and act along ways that are consistent with those attitudes, so that you set up what I call a virtual cycle of change rather than a vicious cycle of staying in a disturbed cycle of pattern. Now, the thing about that particular book that you've highlighted is that I've taken the approach that we can teach these skills to clients, and they can use these skills either on their own, or if they are in therapy with an REBT therapist, the therapist can encourage them to actually become their own therapist. And that's really important. We can teach these skills to people, and they can put these skills into practice and help themselves enormously in their own lives.
So, Windy, can I follow up with another question regarding your approach, which is the rigid, extreme attitudes, changing them, make them think, master them, and then teach them others. But look at them, and you also mentioned, you discussed whether, you wanted to see what are the helpful, useful, logical examples. Give us an example to explain your point. We just want to see, how do you apply that? How do you apply the thinking that you think is, you're not disputing anymore, but you're rationalizing irrational beliefs? Could you share an example?
Well, the example I gave when I was much younger, and the idea when I was anxious, I was underpinning the anxiety was the idea, I must not stammer, and it would be terrible if I did.
Gotcha.
Now, if I was then applying REBT at this point, I'd ask myself, well, okay, is it true that I must not stammer, or is it true that I don't want to stammer, but that doesn't mean that this must not happen? What is consistent with reality? And I'd answer myself, well, of course, there's no law of the universe that says I mustn't stammer. If I was, I wouldn't stammer. But the reality is I do stammer. Now, it's true that I don't like stammering. It's not one of my hobbies. I don't care for it. But I do have to accept that I am prone to stammering. There's no law to prevent that. And terrible, is it really terrible? I mean, or is it inconvenient and disadvantageous? And I would say, well, it's not terrible. I mean, I can think of a lot of things that are worse than stammering. Somebody said to me, you've got a choice. You have stammering or lung cancer. What would you choose? Now, if I was saying stammering is the worst thing ever, I'd say stammering, no, it could be lung cancer. Lung cancer is worse than stammering. Well, that's preposterous. And so you'd work like that with yourself if you were following the self-help skills, or with a therapist would help you to kind of help you stand back and see that these things, we're blowing things out of proportion. That's the common phrase. We're not saying it doesn't matter, because stammering is not great. And incidentally, you can probably hear that I don't stammer that much now. And the reason is I've been implementing these ideas for many years. And I take every opportunity to speak to people, podcasts, radio programs, and I don't avoid anything. Where previously, when I was a young boy, I would take every opportunity to avoid speaking up.
Thank you for explaining that. Okay, well, let's move on to an interesting question I have for you. And that is, whenever we think of a psychotherapist, a psychologist, we start thinking of the procrastinated treatment, multiple sessions, multiple visits, and so on. Now, you've been a proponent of a single session therapy. How do you address concerns about its effectiveness when we're comparing this with the traditional multi-session approaches?
Well, I don't think that's a fair comparison, and I'll tell you why, Amir. Is if you look at agencies, therapy agencies across the world, and we have data on this from America, from Australia, from England. Believe it or not, the most frequent number of sessions people have is 1, followed by 2, followed by 3. And yet therapists are trained to expect clients to stay around for multiple sessions. Now, the whole purpose of single session therapy is to capitalize on many clients' wishes to actually only attend for a brief period of time. And so what we do in single session therapy is that we start therapy from moment one. We don't do a case history. We don't do an assessment of the person. We don't do a case formulation of all their problems to see how they fit together. We ask them the question, what would you like to walk away with today, which would make you coming here worthwhile? And then, of course, single session therapy is a bit of a misnomer, Amir, because it doesn't mean one session and one session only. It means that after the session, you go away, you implement what you've learned, you put it into practice, you reflect on it, you digest on it, and if you want further help, you can have it at that later point. But we don't make the assumption that many therapists make that somebody is going to come back for 5, 6, 10, and if you're a long-term therapist, years and years and years. So it's not I'm not saying it should replace any other form of therapy delivery, but it is something that clients have taught us through their behavior that they want. Clients don't want to wait around on long waiting lists. They
Absolutely.
want help now.
Correct. And I totally will second that. I think if we could find a way where we're prepared, I mean, by we meaning the psychotherapist or the psychologist is prepared, and they're giving the essential information, giving them homework to do, giving them a good, thoughtful insight about the problems, and having them start work and come back and need other sessions, it would tremendously help. So I was looking, that's a sort of a response, especially nowadays when everyone needs help, but no one has time. And it's also become a big issue going back and forth with having sessions. And I'm sure you would appreciate that as well. So I get that. You have a second session if needed, but you don't need to have repeated sessions again and again and again and again. And I think that kills part of the fun of being a psychologist or psychotherapist and practicing that.
Well, but the other thing is that one has to look at, particularly those people in private practice. People in private practice, they kind of want people to come back for a longish period of time,
Sure.
Because that's the way they get regular money. And so the answer to that is make sure that you're so good at doing single session therapy that you get many more people coming to see you.
I agree with you, and that's brilliant analysis, and especially in the States is a big problem, and it puts off a lot of people as well, and people are scared and seeking attention and discussing their issues because they think, oh my God, it's going to be procrastinate. So brilliant. Thank you for explaining that, Windy. Windy, let me go on to ask another very commonly asked question, and that is about unhealthy anger and healthy anger within the framework of the REBT. Would you like to elaborate a little bit and explain our audience?
Yeah, the term anger, it's interesting because if you mention anger, you can get 8 different definitions from 7 different psychologists, and so we in REBT make a distinction between healthy and unhealthy anger in the sense of what is the effect on the person themselves, the anger on the person, and what is the effect on their relationships, and also what is their effect of them being a role model to others. Now, the kind of anger that we regard as being unhealthy is the kind of anger that is really saying something like, again, you must do the right thing, and you're bad if you're not, and you should be punished for doing the wrong thing. Well, that's going to lead you to want, to either aggression, both verbal or physical, or if you suppress it, we know, for example, and you being sort of a medical man, to do with the heart, suppressed unhealthy anger is not very good for the heart. Whereas healthy anger is basically saying, yes, I don't agree with what you've done. However, you have a perfect right to do it because, you are a human being with rights. But as I don't like it, let's see if we can talk about that and come to some kind of conclusion, some realistic conclusion that suits us both. So you're not necessarily calm, but you do have a sense that the other person may be doing the wrong thing from your perspective, but they have a perfect right to be wrong. And I think that unhealthy anger is saying, no, you absolutely must not be wrong.
So it's how you translate them into your positive thoughts, how you use them, and don't let it become like what you said, an aggressive behavior. It starts harming other people, and that's where it becomes unhealthy. Or, like you said, you try to suppress so much that you got into depression, anxiety, and so on and so forth. So that would sort of like define broadly what that anger has its usefulnesses.
Yeah, unsuppressed anger will kill others if you're not careful, but suppressed unhealthy anger will lead to your own demise.
Gotcha. Excellent. We're going to move on to the next topic. We love your views on this one as well. And that's about personal growth. In your experience, we want to know, give us a few examples of some common irrational beliefs that can hinder one's growth. And a lot of people in the States are interested in, they want to keep on growing psychologically. Physically is another aspect, but especially mentally within the domes of staying mental, having mental peace and stuff. So personal growth, your experience, and some irrational beliefs that you think would hinder it.
Well, the first thing to say about personal growth is that it's personal, and my growth is going to be different from your growth. And if I want to, pursue single session therapy, and you want to pursue, flower tending, that's perfectly fine. And so I think the first thing to say is, what is it that is meaningful for you as an individual? And then there's some hindrances there and then, because some people might say, oh, I shouldn't have this as an interest. People will laugh at me and I have to have people's approval. So the need for approval is one of the biggest hindrances of growth, particularly if you're interested in things which are unique and out of the ordinary. And I think that you do have to make a decision about, what are you going to go for? You're going to go for approval, and which means that you have to hide important parts of yourself from others, and maybe even from yourself. Or do you accept the fact that some people are not going to like you, and some people are? So I mean, going for universal approval is generally one of the biggest hindrances to growth. The other thing I think that is a hindrance is the idea that people are more interested in the outcome of what they're doing rather than the intrinsic enjoyment of it. So If you enjoy tending flowers, fine. But if you believe that you have to, win awards with your flowers, then that would interfere with your enjoyment and also your growth. So I think that those are two major hindrances towards, personal growth. The other major hindrance, Amir, I think, is what we used to call somewhat pejoratively laziness. Now, you won't find psychologists talk about laziness anymore. They used to do that many years ago. But what I mean by that is that personal growth generally requires effort, application, self-discipline. And if you believe that it's too hard and things must come easy to you, then that's also a very big hindrance to personal growth.
Thank you for explaining that. That's very, very, very relevant, especially nowadays where people are very social media driven and following other people's, looking at other ideas, and yet don't know what stuff is personal to them anymore. It's scattered. It's all over the place. It's very vague. So I think it's very relevant. Like you explained, you have got to define what's personal to you and where do you want to start from and how do you want to grow.
Right.
We want to discuss another quick little topic and then wrap it up with a question at the end, and that is about your experience of how REBT can address complex emotions. When a brain is so wondrous right now, it's all over the place. How do we control emotions? How do we analyze complex emotion? How would you like a brain to think and channel and analyze? And especially feelings like, let's say, for example, envious or jealousy or stuff like that. What have you found that is effective for helping clients?
Well, one of the things, one of the developers of cognitive therapy, a man called Professor Aaron T. Beck. You may have heard of Tim Beck. He's very famous, lived to, I believe, 100 before he passed away. He wrote a book in 1976 called Cognitive Therapy and the Emotional Disorders. And he made the point there that every emotion is linked to some relationship to a person's personal domain. Now, a person's personal domain includes all the things that are important to that person. It might be central to their personal domain, intermediate, or peripheral on the outside. And what he said is that, for example, every emotion shows a relationship between what's happening to the person and what sense they make of what's happening to them with respect to their personal domain. So with envy, for example, you mentioned envy. The main theme in envy is that somebody else has got something that you prize but don't have. So, for example, let me give you an example. Have you noticed, I don't have hair, and you do. And I might say, oh, I envy Amir his hair because he's got something that I don't have that I want. Now, on its own, that is not a problem. Now, this is where I bring in the REBT bit. If I say, I must have hair like Amir, and it's unbearable to be deprived of it, then my envy is going to be unhealthy. Whereas if I believe it'd be nice to have hair, it's not necessary. Okay, I don't have it. That's a lack, but that's only one aspect of myself. My envy is going to be healthy, and I'm going to be able to admire you. Now, the thing about malicious or unhealthy envy, Amir, and don't worry, I'm not going to do this with you, is that people who are maliciously envious want to either destroy what the other persons have. So I might come round and with some scissors and cut your hair off, shave it off if you're not careful, or make things equal, or I might put you down. That Amir's hair is string. It's terrible, So I I might denigrate what I really value. And so envy is a problem that features a lot in people's problems. It's not something that people come to therapy for and say, I have an envy problem, help me with it.
Gotcha. Well, that's fascinating. Very good. Because generally they portray it as, oh, you're jealous. If you're not jealous, jealous is not good. Envy is a problem. But you're saying envy can be a problem if you make it a problem. And if it's not, it's not. So,
and envy and jealousy are different emotions. They're not the same. Often people talk about them as if they're the same emotions, but they're very different. If I'm jealous. When I'm envious, somebody else has got something that I want and I don't have it. When I'm jealous, I've got what I want, but I fear that somebody else is going to take it away from me, or the other person is going to leave me for the other person. So it's a very different emotion, and many people get that wrong. And my wife says, stop trying to correct people. They are allowed to get their emotions wrong.
Smart woman. Okay,
Yes.
Well, we got that. Last question, Professor. You did collaborative sessions on topics, procrastination. You just mentioned once laziness, public speaking anxiety. Would you recommend a few strategies, RBT strategies, for individuals who are struggling with?
Well, okay. So the first thing you have to do is to kind of recognize, like all anxieties, what am I most anxious about? And quite often people are anxious about, for example, making a mistake, saying something stupid, forgetting what they're saying, drying up, all those things. And they think because it's in a public, scenario, that people are going to laugh at them or judge them negatively. So the REBT conceptualization is this, again, is important. When you're anxious, you really are saying, I must not say anything stupid. It will be terrible. Now, once you say it will be terrible, then now you've invented the audience are always going to laugh at you and are going to be critical of you. Now, in reality, if you say something stupid, first of all, some people are going to laugh at you. Some people are going to feel compassionate towards you. And most people aren't going to recognize that you said something stupid. So generally speaking, the audience are going to I'll be mixed. But when you're anxious, you see them only as critical. So the important thing is, again, to say, look, okay, I'm a human being. I'm not immune from saying anything stupid. I don't want to. But if I do, I do. That's unfortunate. So again, developing that healthy attitude is probably one of the best ways that you can prepare for, speaking in public. Yeah. And now with procrastination, let's take that. What I often say is this to somebody who procrastinates, and say, okay, now what do you want to do? And is it in your interest to do it? Because if it isn't, then you might as well not have a conversation with them, because it isn't procrastination. So make sure that it is in their interest to do it, and also make sure that the time is in their interest to do it. Now, if you've got those two things, then you ask them the question, what condition would have to exist for you to start work at that time? And the opposite is something that they fear is going to happen and that they react against. For example, a person might say, if I knew that I would do it well, then I would do it. So the opposite of that is what they're anxious about. I don't know at the moment whether I'm going to do it well or not, and I have to know that. Again, the rigid idea comes into it. And therefore, you won't start, because if you believe that you have to have a condition that you haven't got, then you're going to wait for it to come tomorrow. And of course, tomorrow comes, it doesn't come. And then there's a point, then you realize that, there's no more time to procrastinate. You've got to do it. And so either you continue to procrastinate and get into a lot of trouble, or you do it at the last minute and you'll do it, but you could have done it much better if you'd have given yourself some time. So procrastination is one of the most common problems that human beings have, as a matter of fact. And I often say I've done 287 books, Amir, not the lousy 200 that you said I'd done. 287.
I apologize.
And if I hadn't procrastinated, I would have done 1,287. We all procrastinate to some degree, but some procrastinate more than others.
Well, there you go. Well, thank you for correcting us, and we appreciate your points. Well, I appreciate, Professor, I've loved the conversation today. Final message, a message to our audience.
Enjoy yourself and make sure that you help others to enjoy themselves. Accept yourself and accept others along the way, and recognize that anything worthwhile involves putting up with discomfort and making the effort.
Well said and excellent. And we all second that. We wish you the best of health. And thank you for joining us and sharing your wisdom and everything in your work, your REBT, your single session, your emotional resilience. And we really appreciate it. And thank you for being with us.
My pleasure. Thank you very much. I've enjoyed being with you.
What a remarkable journey we've just experienced together. The path to health isn't always straight, but it's always worth the effort. I hope today's conversation inspired you to take the next step in your wellness journey, armed with new knowledge and a fresh perspective. If today's episode left you inspired, share it with someone who need to hear this. Give us a thumbs up and your opinion. Keep exploring, keep evolving, and we'll see you in the next episode of KhanKlinics.